Good morning. As she said, I'm Tobey, and I'm an SRE at GitHub. So this is the agenda. Agendas are cool, great way to keep meetings on track. This is the only bullet list I'm going to throw at you today. So I've been in the industry for almost 20 years now. April will be my 20th year. And all this time I've been asking myself the same question, working at large organizations, small organizations, and remote and local, and it's the same question comes up over and over. How can I, as an individual contributor, improve availability at organizational scale? It's a hard problem, right? I've had stints in engineering management. I've been back to individual contributor, and it's still difficult even at the EM position, but it's even harder when you're in an IC and you don't have that kind of built-in authority. So I'm going to start with a little story from early in my career. My first job, when I dropped out of college as a music major and got a job as a systems administrator. And that second day of that job, I'm sitting in the data center, as you used to do, and the senior admin walks through and says to me, "Hey, Tobey, go log in. See that Spark 10 right there in front of you? Go log into that machine and go find the wave process and kill it and restart it." So I do. I go log in, rlogin, because that was still a thing, and type kill all wave. And this is a Solaris box where kill all is quite literal. It kills every process on the machine all at once. And about 2 seconds later, the phone rings in the data center. And this is another thing that used to happen a lot in data centers. You pick up the data center phone, it picks it up, and then all of a sudden I hear a trader go, "What the is going on down there?" And that's the end of the story, but the important part is that I've been thinking about that story for 20 years now, and it comes up sometimes unbidden. I'm going to drop a little bit of theory of stuff that I've been reading about and that has been influencing what I've been doing at GitHub and what I think the future of SRE is. I'm not going to go really deep into this stuff as others have, but I want to call it out as being important. I thought I could get away with just saying safety 2 and then moving on, but I ran a poll on Twitter, and it turns out I should spend at least a little time on it. So first I'm going to talk about trauma, very lightly. So trauma is extreme stress that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. So that story I just told, that was a traumatic experience, right? I'm over it. It's a funny story now. But these things happen to us in the course of our jobs on a regular basis, right? When we have an incident, everybody who's involved in that has experienced at least a little bit. You get nervous, you get stressed out, you have a $1 billion business, a $7 billion business on the line. And that's pretty stressful, and it can overwhelm your ability to cope, even if you don't realize it at the time. In the research I've been reading, I started by reading a book called The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. van der Kolk. Very good book. That led me to polyvagal theory. And I think this has relevance to us because what it says is, instead of the old model where there was basically fight or flight or immobilization or shutdown, there's a third level of response to stress, which is social engagement. That's when you look around your herd for support and to see what to do, right? The lion is coming, you look around your herd, and they're not worried, so maybe you don't worry about it so much. So this is something I'll bring up again as I go on. Another story. A couple of years ago, I was working at a large company with a red logo, and I was an incident commander, and I handled a lot of incidents, but the one that I keep thinking about, I wasn't actually incident commander for, and I didn't even do the investigation. But I did help out a little bit, and then we had the incident review at the end. And we got into it together in a room about this size and had the presentation of the findings. And what happened is that all went very smoothly, right? One of my colleagues got up on stage, much like I am now, did a really nice presentation, and showed the whole course of events and everything that happened and some recommendations for what to do next. And what happened at the end was they had Q&A. And if many of you have been to conferences, right, if you have an extended Q&A, you start to get this pattern that happens, right? Somebody comes up to the microphone and says, this is more of a statement than a question, but, and so that happened here a lot, right? This was a company full of very strong, opinionated engineers. And there were a couple of senior leaders in the room who felt compelled to dig into this problem. And it started to create this mob thing. I was sitting in the back of the room, as I like to do because you can see everything going on. And I remember kind of feeling that the team that owned the service was being put under extreme stress. And I thought, gosh, this setup sucks, right? Because this is putting the team that has already been through so much in a really terrible position. And so I'm not a big fan of those, and we'll come to that in just a minute. So I'm just going to introduce you very lightly to Safety 2 because I don't feel terribly qualified to dig into it. But if you saw Ryan Kitchen's talk, he brought this up. But the point being that this team I was telling you about was running an incredibly complex service, right? It took thousands of little scripts that implemented endpoints for various functionality in the product. And then it compiled them to bytecode, and it moved that bytecode into a live production service, all without error for months and months and months. And then they had a couple of failures in quick succession inside of like 2 or 3 months. And what struck me about that in that meeting where they kind of got attacked was, and this company's changed a lot, like they don't really do this stuff anymore. When they got, what struck me about it is that they missed the fact that this incredibly complex service worked fine 99.9% of the time. And so when I ran into Safety 2, that memory came back to me because this is what we need to be looking at. We need to be studying this because as we move through the next couple epochs of complexity in our systems are only getting more complex over time. We need to get better at digging into things and not only focusing on what goes wrong, but also focusing on what goes right. And then over here on the right, I like this too because it calls out kind of how much we rely on heroes. And our heroes are great, and we love them, but also they're kind of a liability in terms of bust factor, right? And because Safety 2 often gets bundled with human factors and ergonomics, I just want to mention it real quick. But if you think about ergonomics, a lot of us think about keyboards and mice and rising and sinking tables. But it's bigger than that, and it's basically the study of machine-human interfaces. And how do we make them better so that the humans can be more sustainable and the machine systems can be more sustainable at the same time? And then we start talking about things in terms of socioeconomic systems and humans in the loop. Last story. So I started at GitHub last year in June. And then in October of last year, we had a giant incident. Did anybody hear about GitHub's incident last year? I see my team all raise their hand. That's good. They were paying attention. So this was a case of unknown unknowns, or as Ryan said the other day, a perfect storm. We had 3 lightning strikes is the way I like to describe it. The first one was an optic started going bad in one of the data centers in the middle of the night. Not a big deal. Standard thing, right? Optics go bad sometimes. Not all the time. They're generally pretty reliable. So we started to repair it. And in the midst of that repair, some cables got unplugged in the wrong order. And the whole link between the 2 data centers went down for 43 seconds. And in that time, so the next lightning strike was that in that time, our databases couldn't see each other. So this is the third one. And while that's happening, we didn't know that the failover mechanism, when it went into split brain, both sides decided that they were leaders and started accepting writes. And so we had a decision to make. We had to say, do we cut off some writes that our customers made, or do we stop all writes and go back and correct so that we can maintain the integrity of the data for all of our customers? And that's what we chose to do, and that's why the outage was so long. Or sorry, not outage, the incident. I'm not supposed to say outage. And so after that incident, my team was asked to do the investigation. We hadn't been in that role very much before, and so this was kind of the first time. And I was fairly new, and I'd been reading about all these ideas I just told you about. And so part of what we did with that is I sat down and came up with this one-on-one debrief idea, because I didn't want to do a group thing where we put everybody in a room and try to work through what happened. That would just sounded horrible, and everybody had already been through a 24-hour incident. I wanted to, because the incident, as I watched it go by, I wasn't really involved with it because I was still fairly new, but I was really blown away by how much GitHub's culture came into play, by how people would tell their peers to go get sleep, And the IC would tell people to go order food. And on a regular basis, we saw people rotating out and rotating in. And it was really amazing to see that, because in most of my career, I never saw anything like that before. It was a new thing to me, and I thought it was special, and I wanted to protect it. And so I wanted to do something in that trauma release cycle. And this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? It's a total abuse of Venn diagrams, and I recognize that. But like that bottom part, I think also came into it, because this incident involved a ton of people. And scheduling all those people to get all the information we needed from them and to get a clear story would be nearly impossible. So this is the one-on-one incident debrief. I'm going to step through the agenda. So it's really simple, right? There's a little bit of instructions in a markdown file in one of our in the SRE repo. We have a little bit of instructions, and then this agenda is just a bunch of bullet items. And what it does is it lets us break up the work across the team and have everybody go through a consistent set of questions. And the point isn't to get really precise answers, it's to lead people through telling their story. Because that's really what we want to do, is dig in and get people's individual perspectives. And that's how we build a better case for work that we want to do in the future. It's how we make sure that people understand that we do care about their experience. So of course, the first thing always is introductions. Not much to do here, you've all done it before. The second thing is, and this says something different in our repo, but really what it comes down to is informed consent. So I want people to tell me their story from a vulnerable perspective, right? This is where a lot of the kind of release of stress that people have that they're holding on to comes from. If they can feel vulnerable and they're in a Zoom call or in a room with me, and it's just the two of us, they don't have to filter, like, I'm not going to say totally what's on my mind to this group, right? I'm not going to start dropping the kind of F-bombs that I would in a one-on-one situation. Theo might. But so what I say is at the beginning is, I'm going to interview you and ask you some questions. And I'm going to take notes while we're doing this. And a lot of times I do real time. Some people will listen and then type. And I also tell them that, and I feel like other people should do that so that they understand that I'm still paying attention even though they can hear my keyboard clicking away. The other thing I tell them is who I'm going to share this data with. So I type into a Google Doc. We tried to get repo at one point. It didn't really work out because the privacy isn't really there, because everybody inside GitHub can see the Git data. Well, not really, but it's not as, we just didn't want to have a situation where people felt like their comments could be misconstrued, and so we put them in a different place. And the idea being that those docs are only shared with the incident investigators, the person who was interviewed, and of course myself, the interviewer. And then we protect that and we keep it that way, because that way we can have that conversation and people don't need to filter and worry about actually saying, well, Bob screwed up and did this, which, you know, in a group setting you might say, well, something went wrong and Bob was doing a thing, right? So I don't want people to have to spend time trying to filter and make sure that they're being, you know, saying all the right things. I want them to tell me the story. So the first question, what was your role in the incident? Very often at this stage, you will get the entire story all at once, because there are people out there that once you get them talking, they don't stop. And that's okay. Let them talk. Write it down. But this is really just to find out, you know, the basics, right? Were they there the whole time? Did they jump in to help out? Were they doing relief? And that's where you capture this. And again, these are just leading to the story. What surprised you? I love this one. So when we did these, my favorite thing that we got out of this question was a whole bunch of people, not a whole bunch of people, like a few people said, you know, I didn't really know that the database was that important. And it's, you know, like our first reaction as some of us that have been in the industry will be like, what the heck? How do you not know that? But really, it's super important to just accept that information and figure out what to do with it, because now that we know that there are people out there that don't understand the importance of the databases, we can reach out to them and start to educate them and get them more exposure to what's going on in the database team, so that they can have more context, so when they make future decisions, they can do things like go, hey, maybe I should review this query with a peer. and make sure that it's not going to kill the database. Oh, hey, this route is in a hot path. Maybe we should put some caching in or something like that. Instead of just being like, hey, well, database is free, I use Active Record, I never see a SQL query in my life. That's where what we discovered, and we've done a lot of work in that space. How long did you work on the incident? Now, this one, I kind of tell people to give me relative times. Because some people, as soon as you ask this question, they'll be like, well, I logged in at 7:31. And then I worked for about 3 hours, and I logged off, I think it was 8:34 and 10 seconds. And that's not what we're after, right? We don't need it's not a time log. But what we're looking for is burnout. Because we had some people that did super healthy things, right? They worked for a few hours, they called their secondary, and their secondary came in, they went to bed, and then they got up in the morning and took back over. And that works out fine. We had one individual who stayed up for the entire 24 hours. And when I asked him about it, I was like, hey, dude, you could just go to bed, right? You could just call in some of your support. And he was like, no, I really wanted to see this through. And that was fine, right? He got to talk about that, because otherwise he would have just been holding that by himself. And we also knew that we needed to keep an eye to make sure that we didn't get burnout in that space. Were you able to get the support you needed? So this is again going back to, did people get secondaries online to take over for them? If they had questions that they were asking people, did they get answers? Were they able to find the docs and stuff like that? And there's some more questions that kind of overlap with this later. And that's, again, we're trying to draw out as much as we can. Do you feel that the incident was preventable? This is where the salt comes out. Very often you will get, at GitHub, we've had a pretty good experience with this. Nobody really gets kind of super shouty or anything during these interviews, but you can sometimes hear the edge of it, right? Because people are upset, and because their reputation was on the line, or their job was on the line, or they felt that way even if it wasn't. And this is where you're going to hear kind of the dirt as well, because this is where engineers will say, other companies I've been at, that's where those dumb people over there, I don't like that phrasing even, right? But our job as interviewers is to remain calm. How many of you have been to a therapy appointment before? You don't have to raise your hand. The therapist, the large part of their job is to just remain calm and receiving and be centered, right? And so this is a great place to tie back to polyvagal theory. If you are controlling your breathing, so this is where a lot of that stuff you keep hearing about and they won't shut about on NPR, about breathing exercises and how they can help you with panic and anxiety and depression even, is because the link to the polyvagal nerve, your conscious control is mainly through your breathing. And that's how you can start to regulate your nervous system back up into that social engagement part of your response system. So that's our job as interviewers, to do that. In that way, and then what we hope for is that the other person starts to mirror that and remains calm and doesn't get too fired up. What actions do you feel good about? This goes back to the safety 2 idea, is drawing out things that went well. If we focus too much on what went wrong, we might not learn about the things that worked. Like, I called in secondaries. Or, I went through this playbook and it had exactly what I needed. And so we can go look at that playbook and be like, wow, most playbooks suck. So this one actually worked. What about it made it work? What do you think could have been better? So this overlaps with the previous question about do you feel like this was preventable? But again, it leads into a slightly different direction. So a lot of times people will talk about their own performance here. Like, I was really tired. I know I was on call, but I was out at the mall, and I was just exhausted, so I wasn't really as fast to respond as I hoped I could be. It could be, talking more about systems or docs or different things like that. What did you learn from this incident? I hope most of us are building learning organizations. If we want to keep going forward into this growing complexity that we're all dealing with, we have to keep learning. And the cool thing about this process is we can just go ask people, what did you learn? Because what I learned and what you might learn from that incident is different. And we got a bunch of cool stuff from this one. Again, that thing about the databases came up here. Some people learned a whole bunch about our network topology that they didn't know before. I see my DBA shaking his head back there. So they learned about our network topology. They learned what a split brain was. Some people, the younger engineers had never seen this happen in the real world. For a lot of people, this was the longest and largest incident they'd ever worked on. So they learned a ton. And this gives us the opportunity to get that down on paper so that we can broadcast it back out into the organization. So instead of focusing on remediation items, we can extract learning from the incident and then give it back to the company. What do you think we can do to prevent reoccurrence? Again, this feels a little bit redundant with the others, but almost every time we get a little bit different story here. This is where we got things like, we're already working on adding more fiber links between the data centers, and so people are like, hey, we should have more network backbone there. And a lot of times it was a good chance for us as SREs, because we knew about the stuff that was in flight, to say, hey, we're already working on that, it's just not done yet. And it'll be done in like 3 months. And that made a lot of people feel better to know that we were already on it. It was just, we just hit the lightning at the wrong time, the wrong place. Did our tools and documentation serve you well? So this is where you learn about the run books. This is where you learn about places where there are total gaps in documentation. We found a couple of things. We, of course, made remediation items. Everybody loves remediation items. And then we find out about things like we had a dependency issue. And all of this is in the public blog post for the outage, which if you haven't seen it, it's on the GitHub blog, where our CI system had dependencies on github.com. And so that's fine on a regular basis, and even during outages it usually is. But this one was big enough that when we went to redeploy some code in the remediation, it got stuck in CI, and we had to go and take manual action to get it all pushed out. And it cost us 20 minutes, half hour here and there. In a 24-hour incident, that's not so bad, but we learned about these things, and we were able to go and repair them and feed that back into the CI team's backlog so that they can go and fix those dependencies and make them more resilient. This one I feel like, did you practice self-care during this process? This I feel like reflects GitHub's core values more than most of the others. And this was the part that I really felt inspired by during the incident, in that people were taking care of each other, right? Somebody getting on the Zoom call or in Slack and saying, hey, if you've been working and you need food, just order something and expense it. And you should all be doing that during incidents. You should, if you're working, you should just order and expense food, and if your company won't pay for that, then you're probably at the wrong place. It also kind of reinforces that you should do self-care, healthcare, self-care. Very, very similar, but one is awful and the other one's awesome. It helps to reinforce this idea that we are allowed to have self-care even in an emergency. If we don't take care of ourselves through these emergencies, sometimes we don't know how long it's going to go, right? At first you might be, hey, this will take like a half an hour to resolve, or maybe 2 hours. I'll be fine, right? I don't need water for 2 hours. I don't need a pee break for 2 hours. So just by asking this, you start to reinforce that, because after every incident, we don't do these for every incident, but after every time you have one of these interviews, you hear, did you practice self-care? And you can say yes, or if you say no, we can have a discussion about, well, why didn't you? What part of self-care did you neglect? Did you need food? Did you need to step away for a while? And what can we do in future instances to make sure you have the space to go do that? And then finally, for the big MySQL one, we added this one. Can you think of anyone else we should talk to? We started with a list of about 15 people that we were going to interview, and by the end, we interviewed 34 people. And this goes back to that scheduling thing I mentioned earlier. getting 34 people in a room, and this included directors, it included product people, it included a ton of engineers on both sides of engineering and operation, or as we call it now, infrastructure. It just the scheduling thing, and it was super easy, right? Because I just go into the calendar, I go find an open slot on their calendar, boom, put in the agenda, and then fire it up and just do the call. It's even easier for remote companies because we just do it all over Zoom. We don't have to find a room. So in the abstract, I mentioned this other program that's very close to this called SRE Outreach. And I didn't make as much progress on this as I hoped I would between then and now, but I have made some progress. So I spent more time on the one-on-one debrief because I feel like that was super effective and you can take that home and use it. But the other part is the way that we can build influence in an organization, especially when you're new, is to start scheduling one-on-ones with all the people that you need to talk to. And what I've been doing is just kind of watching for people that are interesting to me. And that's what you could do too. And so I might go, oh, hey, I've seen that person in 2 incidents now, and they've had really good ideas. I'm going to set up a one-on-one with them and go learn what they're up to and what they're doing about this. And each time I've done that, it's been super productive because I'll establish a relationship with somebody that I didn't have before. I'll learn about things that they're working on that kind of overlap with SRE stuff so that I can say, hey, when you get ready to launch that, let me know so that I can help you. And the nice thing is you don't need anybody's permission to do this usually, right? Scheduling one-on-ones is super easy. You don't need an agenda. You don't need a huge plan. You just throw a little invite on somebody's calendar, and then you have a discussion. So finally, I just want to talk about some variations on this. So obviously, if any of you take this home to your companies, you're going to adapt it a little bit to your local environment. One that we've tried a couple of times is a written form. We give them the questions, and then people go open a Google Doc, and then they put them in, and then they fill out their answers. This is pretty cool to do, because sometimes you just can't get time with someone, or they're traveling. Or maybe there might be an accessibility angle here, right, for somebody that's just not that comfortable talking and would rather write. So that one's a good one to keep in your back pocket, but it doesn't have that kind of one-on-one conversation where you can ask follow-up questions and kind of lead people through the, like I mentioned earlier, where we told people that, hey, the data center team has new links that are almost online. We're just waiting for some gear to show up. Other things you can do is change up the questions. Make sure you wrap it around your company's culture so that it's self-reinforcing with the culture of the company and your engineering org. So bring this all back to the question that I started with. How can I, as an individual, improve availability of organizational skill? It's building your personal network. It's building those relationships with people all over the organization. The other stuff we can take care of through the control chain, right? Like how we get people to come to incident reviews. But this is how you build your personal brand. It's how you get to where you have the influence so that engineering teams, when they run into a sticky problem, say, hey, Amy, can you come help us look at this? So one answer that I really liked is while I was researching this, I was looking for inspiration. I wasn't really sure what to say at the end of this. And so I went and Googled, I think it was empathy change or something like that. And then the second link I found was this Harvard Business Review article by Patty Sanchez. And most of us would never read that article, right? It's very business speak. It's very well written, but it's really not, the language isn't really the language we use on a daily basis. It was targeted at C-level executives and things like that. But I love this title. The secret to leading organizational change is empathy. And that's really what I'm getting at, is these one-on-one personal connections is how we can get in there and convince people that they need to spend more time on reliability, that they should prioritize their backlogs such that reliability gets to the top. And here's my hiring slide. That's all. That's my Twitter address. GitHub is hiring a whole bunch of people in engineering and in operations and SRE. We're including chaos, SRE, infrastructure, you name it. We've probably got something open right now. And with that, thank you very much, and go forth and build some one-on-one connections.